Hey, Margie here. Did you know that Alzheimer's is both preventable and reversible? And there are things that we can all do to improve the health of our brain that will also improve our bones. And that's what we're going to focus on today with our very special guest, Dr. Heather Sandison. And Dr. Sandison is a renowned naturopathic doctor specializing in neurocognitive medicine and the founder of Salser Health Clinic, San Diego's premier brain optimization clinic, and Marama, the first residential memory care facility to have the goal of returning cognitively declined residents to independent living. She's the author of a fabulous new book that was just released today, Reversing Alzheimer's, the new toolkit to improve cognition and protect brain health. She has dedicated her career to supporting those suffering with dementia. And in this talk, it's just so wonderful because she shares what we can all do. And there are things that we can just put into our life. So I'm so excited to share this interview with all of you. So stay tuned. Welcome, Heather. I am so excited to be here with you. And I just can't wait for you to share all this wonderful information with everybody.
Margie, always a privilege to be with you.
So I just can't get over this. I just have to tell you, give you a shout out because this book that you created is just so good on so many levels. And I know for myself personally, you can see my bookshelf in 2017, when I saw that there was a book on reversing Alzheimer's by Dale Bredesen, I bought that immediately. And the beautiful thing is there's at every age, and we'll talk about this, there's things that you can do to keep your mind sharp and actually prevent Alzheimer's. Besides, if you already have cognitive decline, so much that can be done. So this is so exciting. And I just can't imagine how good it feels. I know I'm always excited when someone, whatever you do prevents a fracture, but just to think that you could help people maintain their cognition so they can enjoy their life is just something so wonderful. So, yes.
That is certainly my hope. Yes, with the book. It's funny, the book has never felt like mine because it's really just my privilege. Like I have the honor of having watched so many people improve their cognition from severe Alzheimer's to those earlier stages, and even people who, feel afraid, right? They're just plagued by anxiety about getting dementia because their parents or loved ones had it. And to see them transform is really incredible and so meaningful. And my hope is that the book does that for others. Just sharing their stories is inspiring, and it makes it accessible that you're not, these shouldn't be the outlier stories. This should be the norm. And Margie, the other thing that's so important, I think, to just start out with in this context is that brain health and bone health are so interrelated that I'm sure when you read Dr. Bredesen's book, hopefully as you were reading through mine, it was like, oh, not only is this good for brain, but we can make this little tweak and then it's good for brain and bone health and it's exceptionally good for it, right? Like we can really start to improve those DEXA scans and improve the MRIs of our brains.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when I'm reading this, because we want to have good bones, but if we don't, we want to have good, sharp minds to really have, our goal is not just that our DEXA scan is good. Our goal is that we can live and enjoy life to its fullest. And so I think we need all of this. And what we do, that's how the body is. And I hate when people look at it, oh, it's just the brain, or, oh, it's just the bones, because really it all goes together. And everything you're going to tell us for the brain is also really amazing for the bones. And there are some tweaks, though, that are very specific to the brain that we're going to talk about today. So I'm so excited about that. But before we start, for those people who have never, I know you were on the podcast once before, but there are a lot of people that maybe haven't, heard or met you before. So could you just share a little bit, because I think it's interesting, your story, how you started and how you got convinced that this was an area you wanted to specialize in?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2017, I saw Dr. Bredesen give a talk at a mental health conference, an integrative mental health conference, and he was describing these cases of people reversing their cognitive decline, people on their way to Alzheimer's who had gotten better. And I had been told by well-meaning, well-educated instructors that wasn't possible. When Dr. Bredesen presented his approach to reversing cognitive decline, it made sense. It was common sense, but just uncommon practice, even in a functional medicine practice or a naturopathic practice. What he was suggesting was that if we stacked all of these interventions on top of each other, right? If we did the detox and we did the hormonal support and we did the lifestyle interventions and we looked for infections, that what we would see was this kind of spiraling up of cellular function versus that downward spiral that often leads to complex chronic disease. And so this conceptually made sense to me. So I signed up for his next training, and then I was on his list of trained providers. And although still skeptical, I had people showing up in my office who were very enthusiastic. And I've learned not to stand in the way of enthusiastic patients, but just to support them and see what I can learn. So a handful of them proved to me that you could reverse dementia and even diagnose Alzheimer's. I watched this happen not just once or twice, but over and over and over. What I saw was that the people who got the most benefit, who improved, were the ones who were able to implement. And so I had a couple of opportunities that came up around 2019 and then going into COVID in 2020. One was to open a residential care facility for the elderly where we had an immersive experience in Dr. Bredesen's approach. So one of the things that's really challenging about it is how multifactorial, how lifestyle-based it is. And it can be hard to change our lifestyle, with full cognitive capacity, let alone when we're starting to decline. And so having this opportunity to create this controlled environment where we can feed them organic ketogenic diet with lots and lots of veggies. There's a garden and lots of outdoor space and social interaction and cognitive engagement and physical engagement and sleep optimization that's all supported in that community. And so that's been an incredible privilege. And many of the stories in the book come from Marama, this care facility. And then I also read around the same time, I think that the IRB approval for our clinical trial basically came through the week that our offer was accepted on the new facility. It's like, I thought that one of them might not happen. And, it was just kind of slowly pushing them both forward. And then that week, they both were like full steam ahead. But we started a clinical trial in February of 2020, and then we slowed down for COVID, and then got restarted in September of 2020. And what we did was we recruited 23 participants into our 6-month intervention, which was intensive. Again, it was all of the functional medicine, all the lifestyle medicine. We had a health coach involved. We had a lot of support for our participants. And of those 23 who finished the 6-month intervention, 17 of them measurably improved their cognitive function. And they had, in order to be eligible for the trial, they needed to have measurable cognitive impairment. So they weren't starting with optimal cognition and then saying that it got better, but we actually measured that they started with decline, they started with impairment, and in fact, some had diagnosed Alzheimer's. And then 17 of the 23, or 74%, improved. And the mean scores in overall composite cognition, in MoCA scores, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, and in memory specifically, all had statistically significant increases over the course of that 6 months for the mean scores of all participants. So, and we saw quality of life improvements, sleep improvements. So generally, people were better after 6 months. And this was really surprising to me. I did not expect to see results that were so promising. Now, of course, this needs to be replicated. We need more studies, and we're doing that. Dr. Bredesen is actually recruiting for a randomized control trial right now, and they have published a very similar trial. It was a 9-month intervention with participants who didn't have as severe cognitive decline, but they published that in 2022 in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, and 84% of their participants had improved. So there's a lot to be hopeful and excited about here.
That's so interesting. So have you found that the people, obviously, maybe it's better to get it as early as possible in terms of the outcomes? Have you seen that it makes a difference at what point you intervene?
Absolutely. Yeah. What we see is that we have higher confidence so the MoCA score, there's a MoCA score is a way that we sort of put a number on where someone is on that spectrum of cognitive decline. So the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, it's a 1-page worksheet where you identify zoo animals, copy a box, draw a clock, identify where you are in time and space. And it's out of 30. So on this worksheet, if you answer every question correctly, it's a 30 out of 30, a perfect score. 26 and above is normal cognition. And once it starts to go down from there, it's representing more and more severe cognitive decline. Now, it's not a perfect tool, but it's relatively easy. It's inexpensive. You can download the PDF online. You do need to get training to administer it so that we're all, we're comparing apples to apples. But what we see, and this plays out with other clinicians who Dr. Bredesen has trained as well, but usually around that 16 to 18 level of MoCA score. So when, coming down from 30, if it's a 16, 17, 18, kind of depending on the support that someone has at home, it gets a lot harder to reverse cognitive decline below that level. Now, that being said, I have learned the lesson the hard way of suggesting there's not hope, because we have seen people with MoCA scores of 0 improve, MoCA scores of 2, so where they're barely verbal, really challenging to communicate, dependent on others to get dressed, to go to the bathroom, to, of course, cook, feed themselves. And we've watched them get better. Now, not all the way back, not all the way back to going to work or, fully being able to care for themselves, but improvements, significant improvements in quality of life and connection with others and communication. So still a worthwhile endeavor.
So exciting. But where do you think we get it wrong? And I know in your book, that's a whole, you really go into that in detail. Like, because this is not known. Whenever I've said, there's hope, I'll hear about someone with Alzheimer's, that their friend or their mother or so-and-so, and people just assume that's it. There's no hope. Or once it starts, it's just a slope downwards and, nothing's effective. Why is that this, where do these harmful ideas and practices about Alzheimer's in our brain, where do they come from? Why is that what exists right now?
Yeah, in the conventional medical community, pharmaceuticals and surgery, this is the tool belt. And unfortunately, there isn't a pharmaceutical intervention that supports a patient in a really meaningful way towards improvement. There are now pharmaceuticals that reduce the rate of decline by about 30%, the monoclonal antibody therapies. Now, they come with side effects of potential brain bleeding and brain swelling. And what they do is they draw out this torturous process. There is no real hope with them of an improvement in cognition. And most participants or patients are only eligible for that if they have mild cognitive impairment. So they have to be earlier on in the disease process as well. They can't be in a late stage Alzheimer's. So it's not a last ditch effort to get them better. It's this kind of prophylaxis. It's something that you, with high risk, high cost, that you engage in earlier on in the process. And it requires a lot of medical management to make sure that the brain swelling and brain bleeding isn't happening. So, that's the perspective from the pharmaceutical and conventional medicine standpoint. There really isn't a lot of hope. There are a couple other medications, Aricept or donepezil, and then Namenda or memantine. And these medications have been around for a while, but what we see, the Journal of the American Medical Association published an article, I think it was in December of 2019, where they showed that 5 years later, if you were on those medications commonly prescribed for dementia, that you were worse off cognitively 5 years later than if you had never started them. Sometimes people will get a little bit better for a few months when they initially start them. But when you look, if you're 65 or 75 even, then 5 years later, that's still meaningful. I had a gentleman in my office who I told him that because he was considering starting them. He's like, I'm 95. I'm not planning to be here in 5 years. So I'll take them. I'll take whatever I can get for the next year. And I thought, that's rational. I can appreciate that perspective. But most people are not 95 when they start these. And I think that having these conversations about what works and what doesn't is really important. The conventional narrative has been that there's nothing you can do. And Dr. Bredesen has been saying for, 8 years that there actually is. And just in the past week or so, Margie, this was really exciting to me because reversing Alzheimer's went mainstream. CNN published 2 stories, and then Sanjay Gupta has a docuseries about some patients that have been seen by Dr. Dean Ornish on the West Coast and Dr. Richard Isaacson on the East Coast, who have improved their cognitive decline after being on the path to Alzheimer's. And this was so exciting to me because my hope is that the narrative is shifting, that more and more people are aware that they can take back control of their cognitive health. And so the crime is when someone is told by a neurologist, which still happens, that there's nothing you can do because it's almost overwhelming. I mean, I wrote an entire book about all of the things that you can do, not to be overwhelming, but to give people a menu of options of things that can work. What we found in our clinical trial, those 17 people who got better, not one of them did everything. They all did something, but nobody did everything and no one did it perfectly.
I love that. In your book, I actually wrote some of the quotes that I like. You said, reversing Alzheimer's as that each incremental change can help you avoid the mountains as well as enjoy the ride along the way. I thought that was such a wonderful way to put it, that, each change is going to make such a big difference, and you don't want to go to overwhelm. That's always what I tell people, because osteoporosis, similar to this, it's not a simple fix. There's nothing like that. You need to look at all the root causes, and it's multidimensional. And so I think that it can be overwhelming, but when you put it that way, one little step to the next little step, and they build up, and all of a sudden you see improvement. But it was interesting also in your book, you had 6 areas of issues that I guess are underlying root causes that you deal with, and 3 of those specifically are important root causes of osteoporosis. Do you want to share the 6 areas that you highlight?
Yeah, so the 6 components of brain health, the way I think through it are, and what we're talking about is balance in these 6 areas, right? Too much, too little in the wrong place at the wrong time is going to cause dysregulation, dysfunction, and in this case, disease. And so when we can look at these components and reach or go in the direction of balance, then we're going to get function. We're going to get regulation in that complex system that is the brain. So the components are toxicity, nutrients, stressors, structure, infections, and signaling. So I could guess which ones you think are really important to bone health. I think that all of them are probably really important to bone
All
health.
of them, but the 3 that are major root causes, you want to share?
Yeah, so nutrition, of course. Are you getting enough of the minerals and vitamins? And then the signaling comes into play there too, because vitamin D, yes, we call it a vitamin, it's a nutrient, but it also signals, right? It signals to the brain and it signals to bones to make sure that we're creating new bone, we're creating new neurons. And so that balance in signaling, right? Osteoclastic and osteoblastic activity, the neurons have a similar there's a similar mechanism, right? We've got to break down the stuff that no longer is functional, and we need to build back new neurons that are. And so signaling nutrients.
There's 4 for sure. Okay.
Toxicity, lead toxicity in bones, and then mercury toxicity in brain. Mold toxicity. Toxins can have a big impact on the brain and the bones. I think I put exercise in the stress category because you want enough and not too much, not too little. But with exercise, right, a lot of people get too little exercise, and so they're not stressing their bones in a way that builds resilience. So we don't want to be sedentary. We also don't want to get so much exercise, right? There's an over-exercising component to that too, but it's that balance of, again, telling the bones, all right, you gotta work here. You gotta be strong here. And the brain really deserves that input too. So having that signal go to the brains and the bone is a big one. Okay, so I've said nutrients, structure, of course, stress, and then toxicity and signaling. I think I got to 5.
Yeah, the only one that I don't know but I guess any kind of inflammation in the body is going to cause, affect the osteoclast, the breakdown, the bone, the cells that break down bone. So probably your other one's infection, and that probably, that's not typically thought of, but sure, if you have an infection, it's going to affect your gut and your antibiotics. I'm sure it also is going to affect your bones, but I think it affects the brain a little more directly. Do you want to address that? in terms of
Yeah, so the
improvement?
brain in particular, what we've found in the autopsies of people who have passed away with Alzheimer's is that in those amyloid plaques, the amyloid plaques themselves, our amyloid is antimicrobial. And so it pops up in the brain in response to some infections, notably herpes simplex, HSV1, which causes cold sores, and then also COVID, and then the Lyme spirochete and P. gingivalis, which is the gingivitis causing bacteria. And so oral health is a really important component of brain health. But we see these particular infections can directly stimulate this inflammatory response in the brain.
Yeah, and so it's so important that you address this and then to move on. In terms of toxins, how do you do testing on everybody? How does that work?
So in our there's foundational pieces to this, right? And in the book, there I have one chapter on how to connect with your provider, whether they're Bredesen trained or it's just your conventional provider, what testing to ask for, that kind of thing. But that's just one chapter of the book. Really, the most important pieces are foundational. It's the diet, the exercise, the sleep, the stress management. Those are the pieces that really impact your brain and bone health. Now, in starting there, before spending any money on all the testing, really starting with those foundational pieces, I think is so important. Now, for anyone who comes into my clinic where they're looking to put the icing on the cake of those foundational pieces, we do test. If you're struggling with cognitive decline, if you have Alzheimer's, if you have any sort of diagnosed dementia, we're asking for a miracle, right? We're asking to reverse that. And it takes some work and effort. And so we do look for all of the potential causes by addressing the testing, looking at the metrics, gathering the data. Many people don't realize they're being exposed to a heavy metal or a toxin, mycotoxins, molds in the environment, or chemicals in the environment. And so when we look at that, sometimes we'll discover things that we didn't expect.
Hey, Margie here. As a physical therapist, I know firsthand how important exercise is for our bones, overall health, and happiness. And unfortunately, there's a lot of confusion on what exercises are safe and effective for people with osteoporosis. That's why I created this handout that contains a 30-minute video where I explain the concepts so you understand the do's and don'ts when it comes to exercise. And this is important because this way you can go into any class and know what you should be doing and what you should avoid. Because too many people are doing exercises that actually increase their risk of spinal fractures. I also included videos of me demonstrating effective balance, posture, and weight-bearing exercises you can put into your day right away. So all you need to do to access this handout, it's free, is go to tinyurl.com/osteoporosis exercises. So it's tinyurl.com, again, /osteoporosis exercises, or you can click the link in the show notes. Now back to the show. So let's talk about the exercise because I learned things from you that I wouldn't have thought about. So tell the specifics of what you found, not only, doing basic exercise, but what have you found is really effective for cognition, just keeping your mind strong, sharp, as well as, preventing decline, as well as for people that have Alzheimer's. Like, what things do you add to the basic exercise program?
Yeah, so aerobic and strength always, right? That again, these are our foundations. And then if you want to kind of up level that, the first thing I recommend doing is what we call dual task exercise. And I've learned a lot from a group we're collaborating with up in LA, the Pacific Neuroscience Institute. There's a gentleman there, Ryan Glad, who has published a bit about using dual task exercise to improve cognition and kind of the gamification of exercise. So what they are doing there is the simplest example of this is walking and talking, right? What we want to do is be engaged cognitively at the same time that we're engaged physically. So for some people, this might mean going to a yoga or Pilates class where you're being cued by the instructor. And now some of us here have probably gone to the same yoga instructor, the same Pilates instructor over and over again for years, week after week, day after day. And we know what that instructor is going to say before they've even said it. And we can kind of check out. We can move to our like grocery list and what we have to do for the rest of the day. And we're not really cognitively present. The same thing can happen while we're taking a stroll and listening to a podcast, right? So what we want to do is we want to be engaged. We don't want it to be so easy that we're checking out, both physically or cognitively. We also don't want it to be so stressful or hard that we're giving up. And so finding that it's going to be dynamic, right? As we get more physically adapted, right? That we have more physical capacity for exercise, we need to up the ante. As we get better cognitively, we need to up the ante, right? So ballroom dancing comes up a lot because this is where we're engaged physically, emotionally, we're engaged socially, we're engaged with the music. We've got to remember the steps. But Zumba or an aerobics class to music, these kinds of things can be really, really helpful for getting even more benefit from the time you're spending exercising. And we recommend about 200 minutes a week. You'll see recommendations anywhere from 150 to 300 minutes per week. But if you can get in at least 200 minutes, which is about 4 or 5 classes potentially per week, then you're off and running. You're doing great in terms of using exercise for both, I think, probably brain and, I hope you agree, bone health.
Oh, absolutely. I remember the first time we discussed this, and it's in your book as well. I remember thinking, well, wait a minute. I always tell people, I want to prevent falls. So I always tell people not to multitask. And so then I thought, well, we discussed this before. So we want to do it in a safe way that they're not concentrating on what they're doing. And you had given some good tips, like being on the Bosu ball, doing different things. Do you want to give a couple examples of some specific things people can do? Because we do all balance is one of the most important things, in terms of preventing falls, because as you know, if we don't use it, we lose it. And so doing balance in conjunction with the cognitive is not something I've thought about, but that makes so much sense. Do you want to give a few examples of how people have done that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love the Bosu ball. Bosu ball, even a wall sit or doing lunges and then counting backwards. So like on the Mocha test, you start with 100 and you count backwards by 7, or you subtract. Serial subtraction is what it's called. So you can make up these math questions, right? Especially leaning into the things that are challenging in the prevention stage, right? And we give examples in the book of things that you can do no matter where you are on the spectrum of cognitive decline. So if you're supporting someone who has more severe cognitive decline, of course, adapt this and make it, maybe they just count backwards from 100 by 1, right? 199, 98. But for somebody who's in that prevention stage, you might want to decide, are they having trouble with names? That's often an early sign of cognitive decline is they can't come up with names or they can't come up with nouns, words, and it's language that's affected. Sometimes it's math, or I've never been good at math. Then lean into the math if you're in that prevention stage. But you can make up different exercises and, we'll have people name the neighbors that live in the houses around them, or name all of your in-laws, especially if you have a lot of them and it's hard to keep track of, right? Go to things that are emotionally compelling for you, and things that we're emotionally connected to tend to be a little easier, and we tend to be better at remembering them. And then it's harder, if it's not fun, we're much less likely to do it and to engage in it. And so finding ways to make it fun, whether it's doing it with someone that you love and enjoy or someone who makes you laugh, those things can make this a lot better. Finding a trainer or a physical therapist, somebody who you enjoy being around, who helps to motivate you, is another great way to do it. And then coming up with ways that you can quiz yourself, whether it's states and capitals or places that you've been. There's lots of ways to do it.
Yeah, I love it. I'm thinking like those games, I went to the picnic and I got this, this, and this, and then the next person goes and they have to remember. There's so many different games, but I never thought about, for so many ways, that's great because yes, it's really going to help your brain, but also in life, talking about preventing falls, I always tell people to concentrate on what they're doing. But if you've practiced this in a safe environment, you're practicing on the Bosu, or you're practicing while you're doing lunges, then you sort of are able to do this. So then when you're out in the world and you're concentrating and you're walking, you sort of are able to do both of them. So I think it's a win-win in so many ways, and that's something that people talk about in
Yeah,
terms
it's very practical training, right?
Exactly. The other thing I love in the book, I love this because a lot of us want specifics. I think that's great. I am so happy that you did this. When I'm reading the book, I was like, oh, this is great because we can't know it all and we can't figure it out. So you do that for us. And the other beautiful thing is a book is not expensive. So people, I always believe in what I've told people on this podcast a million times is that knowledge is power. And if we can have the knowledge, then we can move forward, and figure out the best path for ourselves or also for our loved ones. But you really lay it out step by step. But I like how you design our day for us. And the interesting thing when I'm looking at that, I'm thinking as people get older, you talk about both predictability and novelty. And maybe share that because I think a lot of people just sort of have their routine, which there's a good part about that. But talk about the combination and why, what do you think is optimal about that? Because I found that so interesting.
Yeah, so our routines are really what determine our health trajectory over time. It's those decisions that we make every day about what we put in our mouths, about how much movement we get, about what time we go to bed, about whether or not we floss our teeth, right? Those sorts of things are really what determine how gracefully we age, what our health looks like, what our capabilities look like where we get to our 80s and 90s. And so creating routine is really important and helpful because that's going to be the rule, not the exception, right? We're going to go on trips and we're going to have these things that happen and come up, and there's going to be a birthday here and there. But what we choose to do every day on most days is what's most important. And so then how do we do that? How do we create a structure for that so that this is easier behavioral change to make? And part of it becomes adapting our morning and evening routines because we all have them. So we all have what we do first thing when we get up in the morning, and usually we follow a predictable pattern. We all have our evening routine, whether we like it or we're proud of it or not. We have it. And when we start attaching the behaviors that we want to the things we already do, it's a little easier to keep them steady, like to adopt them long term. So then what do we do with the rest of the day? Having these calendars, and we use basically the structure that we use is what we do at Marama, which is where people come, this immersive environment where all day, every day, what we are doing, everything that you do, we keep them very busy. Everyone who moves in is exhausted at the end of the day, especially in that first month when they're adjusting, because the entire day is designed around keeping you cognitively engaged and working that muscle, both physically and cognitively, right, all day long. And so when we do this, though, it can start to feel boring. All humans really desire this comfort that we get from predictability of, right, this routine that I know that at 8 o'clock I'm going to have breakfast, and then at 10 o'clock I'm going to go for a walk, and then at lunch is going to be at noon, and after lunch I'm going to do something creative. But then what we can do is we can change up where we go on the walk. We can change up what kind of creative activity we do. Some days it'll be sculpting, some days it'll be gardening, some days it'll be painting, some days it'll be a puzzle. And when we change up the activity, we get this element of like surprise, and we get to look forward to it. We get something new. Maybe somebody different comes for dinner. These types of things keep us engaged. They keep us excited. They keep us kind of wondering, and that anticipation that makes life fun. It also gives us something that stands out to reminisce about. So we get to look forward to it. We have the anticipation. We have the enjoyment of the experience itself. And then we get to reminisce with our community about it. So this is part of why, in every culture, there's holidays to celebrate. There's things to look forward to. But we get comfort as well from that regular pattern, that routine, right? That Christmas or Hanukkah that comes around every year around the same time. New Year's, it comes around our birthday, right? We get this kind of predictability, but also this element of something a little bit different to keep us engaged in it.
So your suggestion because so many people are, they've retired and they do have day. It's the same thing. So in terms of for the brain stimulus, your suggestion then is to try to add some variety or try some new things.
Absolutely. And I think that this is helpful in multiple ways, right? Because when we know ourselves well enough, if we kind of really think about what motivates us. So, like for me, very honest here, if I've paid for an exercise class, I'm so cheap, I am not going to miss it because I've already paid for it and I don't want to lose the money, right? But if I've scheduled a hike with a friend, I'm going to show up because she's going to be waiting there for me at the parking lot. And so I'm showing up more for her than myself. And so I know that those two things motivate me to get exercise. If I just put it on my calendar at 6 a.m. and nobody's showing up and it's just up to me to get up and go for that run by myself, it's much less likely it's going to happen. So when I do that self-exploration of what makes it exciting, what makes it fun for me, what makes me more likely to do it, paying for it, scheduling it, and having somebody else to show up for are the things that work for me. But what works for you? For some people, they're like, oh, I'll pay for it and not show up all day long. Right? And it's a different motivator. And so finding what it is for you or your loved one so that you can commit is helpful.
Yeah, it's so funny because for me, exercise is absolutely non-negotiable, no matter what. Same thing with my meditations. It's totally non-negotiable. So, but doing something new and fun and really exciting and is something that I have to schedule in because otherwise I won't do it, even though I know how important it is. So it is really an individual type of thing.
So that non-negotiable thing that you just mentioned, that's our identity, right? Your identity is somebody who meditates and exercises every day. And when we start identifying, and this is part of creating that habit, right, is when we start identifying as someone healthy, as someone who exercises, as someone who meditates. Now, if we start to not, it's this conflict with our identity. And that's really uncomfortable for us. So we're going to go back to doing it. And that's a great way to actually commit to change, is to shift how you think of yourself and to consciously do that. I am a meditator. I am an exerciser. I am someone who goes to sleep at 8:30. I am someone who, I just don't eat gluten. I am not someone who drinks soda, right? Now, once that identity is in your brain, it makes it very uncomfortable to make a decision that's in conflict with it.
I learned that from the book, one of my favorites, Atomic Habits from James Clear. And it's such a it's really wonderful. And it really helps people change when you think about that. Instead of just saying, I'm not going to eat something, I am a healthy eater, or exactly, or I'm an exerciser, even if I just put on a pair of sneakers, whatever it is, you just start on that path to that identity. I love that. So now I want to address a couple of really important things. And I know this is a very big part of your program, the diet, because there are specific diets. There's a lot of different diets that are healthy for our bones, but there's a specific diet that you found really has helped people with their brains and with Alzheimer's, preventing Alzheimer's and treating it. Do you want to share that?
Absolutely. So an organic ketogenic diet is what we recommend. And this ketogenic diet, I know a lot of emotions come up for people around ketosis, and I want to make two things super clear right off the bat. One, I don't think anyone should be in ketosis forever. This is a diet that increases metabolic flexibility when we go back and forth in and out of it. And so for someone struggling with cognitive decline already, I recommend getting into ketosis for 3 to 6 months.
Just explain what ketosis is, because some people listening may not know exactly what it is.
Yeah, so ketosis is when we switch from burning sugar for fuel. So sugar, glucose, carbohydrates, we can use those kind of interchangeably. That gets turned into ATP, or the fuel that our cells run on. And most of us run on sugar all day, every day for our entire lives. Now, if we restrict carbohydrates to about 50 grams per day, and these need to be spread out, it can't be 50 grams all at once. It needs to be, less than 5 grams per meal, per snack. If we reduce our carbohydrates significantly, after about 3 days, about 72 hours, and you can do this fasting completely, but I recommend doing it by consuming calories, just not carbohydrates, you will flip a metabolic switch and you will start using fats or ketones to burn as fuel. And in the brain burns ketones specifically. Beta hydroxybutyrate is one of these ketones, and you can get this from coconut oil, which has a high percentage of MCT or medium chain triglycerides that turn into beta hydroxybutyrate or that ketone. And when we burn ketones, so instead of turning sugar, glucose, carbohydrates into ATP, we turn ketones into ATP. And in that process, there's less oxidative stress that is produced. It also is a detoxifying diet. Some people will experience weight loss or at least changes in their body composition away from fat. And if you're exercising, hopefully more muscle. It's not a low nutrient diet. It is not a low calorie diet. It's a high calorie, nutrient dense diet. And one point to make here is it's not a bacon and cheese diet. This is not just about meat and dairy. This is about lots of leafy greens, tons of nutrients coming from nuts and seeds. So we're getting lots and lots of plant nutrients. I do recommend some animal protein because it's hard for a lot of people, if they're restricting carbohydrates, you want to have an abundant amount of all of the things that are not restricted to get into ketosis. So it's really about flipping that metabolic switch from burning sugar for fuel to burning ketones for fuel. Not forever again, but at least temporarily so that you get the brain healing benefits of less oxidative stress, detoxification, anti-inflammatory. Many people will experience cognitive clarity very quickly within 3 to 4 days. Also, sleep often improves, mood often improves. So there are lots of benefits outside of just cognition. And then this is not something that you can do forever. It's challenging. It's not sustainable. And I want people to be able to go to Italy and enjoy a little gelato, go on a trip, enjoy a birthday or a wedding. And then the idea is that you come back to it regularly. So we go in and out of ketosis and glycolysis, or burning sugar for fuel, back and forth throughout the year. Maybe for someone with cognitive decline, you want to be in ketosis more often than not, but that might be Monday through Thursday and then taking Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. Or it might mean the first 3 weeks of the month and then you take the last week of the month off. It might mean two months in ketosis, 1 month not, right? So you can play with this in different ways, but you want to go back and forth.
It's interesting because the one time when we did a program together for my community, and that was the big question. People are like, well, how can I have a bone healthy diet and you just answered that in terms of making sure it's nutrient dense and that's really the key. But a big issue is, as a root cause of osteoporosis, has to do with sugar and people having elevated blood sugar and just increased glucose and all sorts of issues from that. And so in terms of this helps on many levels because it's really a very effective way, just reducing carbs and the whole keto, the whole diet is a treatment. I mean, it's wonderful. And a lot of people, what I've seen, I don't know if you've seen this as well, is that people get their blood work and they're in pre-diabetes. There's no question there. And nobody says a word. Nobody says a word, oh, you're fine. They just wait until it's diabetes and then treat it, where this is an area that there's so much that can be done so that we don't, and it's just not looked at. It's not even sometimes acknowledged that there's even an issue until the numbers reach the diabetic level. Do you see that as well?
I do. And I've been seeing more of it recently for whatever reason. Things come in clusters. And it's alarming to me because you'll sometimes hear Alzheimer's called type 3 diabetes. So the brain is sensitive to this. As we age, regardless of our diabetes status, regardless of our hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of essentially it's sort of an average of how much glucose has been in our blood, how much sugar has been in our blood over 3 months. And when that number starts going up, we can get into this pre-diabetes phase. And what's happening in the brain is that as we age, regardless of what that number is, but more so if we're going towards prediabetes or diabetes, we lose insulin sensitivity. So this is, sometimes you'll hear it called insulin resistance. And insulin, I think of it like the key that goes into the door so that we can open the door and get sugar from the bloodstream into the cell. And if we can't do that because that insulin resistance, it's almost like the key is stuck, it's jammed, it's been copied too many times and we can't use it anymore. And so we end up with a buildup of insulin and a buildup of sugar, but it's not supporting the cells and making energy. It's in the blood. And now we have high concentrations of this that actually can cause damage, that can cause glycation. It's basically like caramelizing an onion, but it's an irreversible process that happens to our cells and can happen very easily in the brain. And this is a cause of dementia.
Yeah, no, I know with me, I decided I was going to use the constant glucose monitor because my A1C all of a sudden was 5.6 and starting to go. I'm like, oh gosh, I eat so healthy. But it was very interesting. And I think it's the majority of people in that range versus. And so for me, it was truly, I was eating too much fruit, not balanced with protein and fats. Once I learned, I was able to do it. But it's just such an important root cause of both osteoporosis and issues with your brain and Alzheimer's. And I think it's, it's something that's just so important. And you do a really good job in the book of giving examples, because in terms of if people are thinking, well, how am I going to do this? You do a really wonderful job of what foods are, how you can combine the foods and in terms of, a diet plan and different things. So I think that's really helpful. In terms of protein, what's your recommendation? Because you also go over some really good high protein foods that you can use. What do you think about protein? Because that's so important for your bones.
It is a really important component. And, we have so many fat and sugar. We have so many intense emotions around it, right? Like we vilified fat for a long time. And then now we're kind of vilifying sugar, which I think is kind of appropriate. But then protein, it's like we forget about protein and it kind of gets lost in the conversation. So I love, hemp hearts are a great high fat, high protein source. Chia seeds are a good fat and fiber, certainly. And then I'm a huge fan of chicken thighs, of tempeh, of and I would love to hear some of what you think of. But like collagen powder is a great way to get organic collagen powders are a great way to get in 20, 30 grams of protein pretty quickly in a tea or a coffee. So there's a turkey, I am a fan of grass-fed animal protein. I personally have an egg allergy, so can't use that one, but eggs are really high in choline, great source of protein and some of the good fats as well. They're really a perfect food. So if you tolerate them, I'm a huge fan of eggs on a ketogenic diet. And then balancing that with the fiber and phytonutrients of leafy greens, avocado, all of the olives, and good fats. I mentioned coconut oil, olive oil, avocado oil, even butter, ghee, I'm a fan of as well.
Yeah, no, those are all good. I think what's nice though is you lay it out so no one has, because it's hard to sort of figure it out on your own. A lot of these.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the CGM. It's one of my favorite things. And then also, yes, in the book, we really aim to do that. Like, what's a meal plan for 4 weeks? And then we have 15 recipes that I make at home. We have Marama, we have a full-time chef. And sometimes it can feel like, oh, do I need a full-time chef to do this? But these are all recipes that I've made at home that are simple and easy and delicious. And then we also have a list of foods that you can eat. We really want to focus on what you can have, not on what you're cutting out. And it can take, what I love about switching your diet is it's like the bicep curls for your brain. When you shop differently, think about new foods, think about new recipes. When you go through the executive function of like looking through a few of the recipe books or the cookbooks or looking online, and then going to the store and shopping a little differently, and then coming home and making it and then enjoying it and cleaning up the kitchen and maybe doing it with people. This is a executive function process, right? It's the planning and execution. And that is good for your brain. And it's so practical. It's part of the dignity of staying independent, right? Is that we can feed ourselves. And so I know people talk about Sudoku and, these online, word games and stuff like that. I'm like, just make yourself new food, make yourself new healthy food and get in the kitchen. That alone is a great brain game.
How wonderful is that? And I think what I like is that, as I said, you start off very simple steps and just do one thing. And that's what happens when you start doing one thing, then you add the next. And all of a sudden you're living both a brain healthy lifestyle as well as bone healthy, and you feel good. So what do you see with people when they change their diet? Because they're coming to you with cognitive issues. So are they so surprised? What happens?
Oh, Margie, I mean, my favorite thing ever, my favorite words to hear are, "I got my mom back." When someone comes in and shares just how their loved one is present again, is able to engage in the latest birthday party or the latest holiday party, and they were really there. They were communicating. They're engaging in conversation again. They're starting conversations at the grocery store. They're back to being themselves. That is just the most heartwarming, most fulfilling, meaningful thing I could ever hear, and what gets me out of bed in the morning. And I think I lost a friend a year or two ago, and at his funeral, his brother was sharing this really beautiful eulogy, and he said he was describing these text messages that his brother would send. He was this really funny guy, and he would send these really long, really I think when he was alive, we would have called them obnoxious, but now they're, of course, very endearing. And he was describing them, and everybody knew what he was talking about these ridiculous messages that you would get from him. And he was like, "What I would give for one more text message from my brother." And that night when I was lying in bed, like just thinking about the service and everything, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what we do. This is what we do, is we give people that one more thing, that what I would give, that what would I do to get one more text message, one more holiday, one more anniversary, one more summer with my loved one. This is it.
Wow. And this is why when the minute I heard that you had written the book, I contacted you. I wanted you because I want to get this information out because it's not there. I see this all the time where people truly don't realize there is hope. And you see this, you work with this, you studied it, you've done research, and now you've written a book. So, people have to know there is that. What a beautiful way to put it, though. That when they say I got my mom back, wow, that's incredible, because that's the most depressing when the person physically is there, but as you said, they're not there. So
The long goodbye.
what a beautiful, it's funny, my husband delivers babies, and that's such a beautiful experience to be part of, but that must just be so heartwarming for you when someone comes in and they say that, or the person, what happens with the person who's realizing their memories back. Tell us a little bit about that, because this is so exciting to me.
Yeah, it's funny. I think when you're in it, I think it's hard. There's a little bit of a disconnection. And so it often is reflected from the people around them, the change. Many people who suffer with dementia, there's a lack of awareness. Because it's a disease that affects the brain, they often don't realize. Some people who are earlier on, younger, they really get it because, like I saw a woman, she actually was in our clinical trial, and she disappeared for a couple years. And then she came back recently, and she's like, when I was in the trial, I was able to keep my job. I was able to keep things going in the house. And then she had a few stressful issues come up. She lost both of her in-laws. Her kids were struggling health-wise. And so she fell off the diet. She stopped taking the supplements. She wasn't doing it anymore. And she's like, she really noticed that she wasn't keeping up. Like, bills weren't getting paid. It was a little scary. She was worried she was going to potentially lose her driver's license. She got lost one day when she shouldn't have. And so now she's back, and just this week, we looked at her labs again, and she's back on the program, and she's like, okay, I realized I've really got to stick with it. This is a big deal, and I'm going to go down the path that my mom did if I don't keep it together, if I don't stay on this. And I think that for some people, it's not this joyous, like, oh, yay, I'm back. There is a little bit of that, but it's like the reckoning with, oh my God, what happened to my mom might happen to me. And I have control over this, but I need to take this very seriously. And I need to make these better decisions every day and make this a lifestyle. Because I would never characterize what we do as a cure. I think of like you get a urinary tract infection, you take the antibiotics, and you're done. You don't think about it again, right? It's behind you. There's nothing you have to do differently for the rest of your life. But with dementia, this is about adopting a lifestyle. And that is a big part of why, as you mentioned, the book is written in this way where we can stack things, where it's not about getting overwhelmed and doing everything all at once, but it's about taking that one step. If you do one thing for your diet, do this. If you do one thing for exercise, do this. If you do one thing for sleep, do this. Okay, then when you go to the third chapter, if you're ready to do the next thing, add this, and then you get that spiraling up. And I wish, Margie, that it was like, oh, people come in and they're just so happy and they get, I mean, we see a little bit of that, but really it's like, wow, I gotta do this.
I do like that in the book as you're going through the chapter. So like the one thing to do is, each chapter you give like, all right, the one thing, which I thought so very helpful.
And many of them are free, right? So it's not always about spending a ton of money. Certainly you can spend a ton of money and resource and time, of course, and it does take some, but many things are very accessible for almost no dollars.
So tell everybody how to get the book. Just give everybody all the information that we need here because it's coming out. Heather and I just discussed this, and so this talk is going to come out on the day the book's released, so it should be ready now.
Thank you. Yes, June 11th, 2024. Book is available wherever you buy books. So Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Target, wherever you buy books. Reversing Alzheimer's is the name of the book. My name is Dr. Heather Sandison, and you can find out more about me. We've got coaching programs, we've got a clinical practice, and then our residential care facility. There's 2 locations, one in San Diego County and one in Wichita, Kansas. And you can find out more about all of those things at Dr. Heather Sandison, SANDISON.com.
Oh, well, I can't thank you enough. Is there anything you want to leave everybody with before we end? Because I just am so excited. It's like birthing a baby, right? It's like going out to the world and changing, really, really making a difference in people's lives. And I know how much work goes into the book. And, thank you for doing that because I just know it's going to, I'm certainly following. I'm following a lot of the steps that you talk about. But I think that this is going to just make such a big difference for so many people. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Margie. I would just say to people, don't let anyone tell you there's nothing you can do for brain health. That's factually inaccurate. There's so much, and just get started.
Well, thanks so much. It's always a pleasure, and best of luck with the book. I know things are going to go great.
Thank you, Margie. Be well.
I hope you enjoyed this interview, and how exciting to know that there's so much that can be done to both prevent and reverse Alzheimer's. And there are steps that we can all take and put into our lives so that we can maintain a healthy brain, because it's important to have healthy bones, but we also want to have that healthy brain so that we can enjoy all that life has to offer. All the links that Dr. Sandison talked about will be in the show notes. And also in the show notes is a link for a handout that I created on osteoporosis exercises that has posture, balance, some 2 daily weight-bearing exercises, as well as a video really explaining the principles of exercise and osteoporosis. So make sure to check that out as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.